What would you do if your HOA tried to control land they didn't even own? That's exactly what happened to me. I had finally escaped the endless noise of the city, leaving behind traffic, deadlines, and the suffocating weight of urban life for something quieter, something real. My dream had always been to own land, something untouched, something mine. And after years of saving, I found it. A modest farm tucked away in the countryside, far enough from the chaos but close enough to civilization if I ever needed it. It wasn't much to look at, an old two-bedroom farmhouse with peeling paint and creaky floors, a barn that needed more than a few repairs, and acres of wild, untamed beauty. But it was perfect. Here, I woke up to birdsong instead of honking cars, to fresh air instead of smog. My days were simple, spent tending to the land, mending fences, and planting a garden. At night, I sat on my porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, finally feeling at peace. That peace didn't last long. The first time I saw her was on a Tuesday morning. I was fixing a section of my north fence when a sleek, black SUV rolled up my driveway, kicking up dust as it stopped near the entrance. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and heels that were entirely impractical for a gravel road. She held a clipboard in one hand and a thermos in the other, scanning my property with the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who had already made up their mind. "Good morning," she called out, her voice crisp and cheerful, though something about it felt off. "I'm Claudia Stevenson, president of the Green Haven Estates HOA." She paused, as if expecting her title to mean something to me. I wiped my hands on my jeans and rested against the fence. "Nice to meet you, Claudia, but I think you've got the wrong address. This farm isn't part of Green Haven Estates." Her smile didn't falter, but something about it shifted, tightened at the corners. "Oh, I know that," she said, tone almost too pleasant. "I just thought it would be nice to introduce myself. After all, we're all part of the same community." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "Well, thanks for stopping by, but like you said, I'm not part of your HOA. I like to keep things simple out here." Her eyes flickered, annoyance, but the smile remained. "Of course. I completely understand. I just wanted to let you know about some of the wonderful programs we offer, landscaping services, property maintenance consultations, all aimed at keeping the neighborhood cohesive and visually appealing." I glanced at the barn, at the wild grass swaying along the fence line, at my house with its uneven shutters and weathered wood. The message was clear: I didn't fit into her idea of a cohesive neighborhood. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, forcing a polite smile, but my patience was already wearing thin. She lingered for a moment, as if debating whether to push the issue further, then finally nodded. "Well, if you ever change your mind, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help." With that, she climbed back into her SUV, the tires spitting gravel as she backed away. I watched her go, a strange sense of unease settling over me. Something about her visit didn't sit right. Maybe she really was just trying to be neighborly. But deep down, I knew better. I tried to brush off Claudia's visit as nothing more than an overzealous HOA president with too much time on her hands, but that sense of unease lingered. Something about the way she spoke, the way she lingered as if evaluating me and my land, made me feel like a problem she was already working to solve. I told myself I was overthinking it. I had bought this farm fair and square. I wasn't under any HOA jurisdiction. She had no power here. But that was before the flyers started showing up. At first, it was subtle. A neatly folded paper stuffed into my mailbox, printed on official-looking HOA letterhead with a list of community concerns. Vague statements about property upkeep, noise levels, and environmental impact. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. My farm had been here for decades before Green Haven Estates ever existed. My property upkeep was just fine, and my noise levels consisted of birds, rustling leaves, and the occasional hum of my tractor. I tossed the flyer in the trash and went about my day. Then came the handwritten notes, taped to my door when I wasn't home. Your tractor is disturbing the peace. Please be considerate of your neighbors. Your overgrown hedges are an eyesore, perhaps consider a landscaping service? We kindly ask that you limit your machinery use to daylight hours. I wasn't about to be intimidated by passive-aggressive notes, but the fact that someone had walked up to my door while I was away set me on edge. I installed a simple security camera by the front porch, just in case. I had no idea how quickly I'd need it. One quiet Saturday afternoon, I was pruning some overgrown bushes when I heard the familiar crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I turned, already knowing who it was before I saw the black SUV pulling in again. But this time, Claudia wasn't alone. A man stepped out of the passenger side, dressed in a tucked-in polo and khakis, carrying a thick binder stuffed with papers. Claudia's voice was all sunshine as she approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though she didn't wait for an answer. "This is Greg Thompson, one of our HOA board members. We wanted to discuss a proposal with you." I straightened, brushing dirt from my gloves. "A proposal?" Greg flipped open the binder, clearing his throat. "Some of the residents in Green Haven Estates have expressed concerns about how your property impacts the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood." I stared at him. "Concerns? It's not a criticism, per se," he continued, giving Claudia a nervous glance. "It's more about ensuring consistency. For example, the color of your barn, it's a bit bold, don't you think?" I nearly laughed. "It's red. It's a barn. That's what barns are supposed to be." Claudia gave a light, artificial laugh in return, though it was clear my response irritated her. "Of course, but a neutral shade, maybe beige or gray, would blend better with the surrounding homes." I folded my arms, jaw tightening. "This is a farm, not a suburban cul-de-sac. Your subdivision was built next to me. My barn's been here for over 50 years. Greg cleared his throat again, flipping a page in his binder. "We're just suggesting minor adjustments. Perhaps trimming the hedges near the road, installing a white picket fence." I cut him off, my patience gone. "I'm not part of your HOA. I don't have to change a damn thing." Claudia's smile finally cracked, but only for a moment before she smoothed it back into place. "We're not trying to impose," she said, though the steely edge in her voice suggested otherwise. "But as neighbors, we all have a responsibility to maintain certain standards." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Look, my property is clean. My fences are mended. My land is well maintained. If that's not good enough for your HOA, that's your problem, not mine." For a brief second, Claudia just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, just as quickly, she smiled again, though it was colder now, sharper. "Well," she said, smoothing down her blazer as if brushing off the tension. "I hope you'll reconsider. We're all just trying to create a harmonious community." With that, she turned, heading back to her SUV. Greg hesitated for a beat, giving me a look that almost seemed apologetic, before closing his binder and following after her. I watched them drive off, dust swirling in their wake, my hands still clenched at my sides. Something told me this was far from over. I was right. The next week, things got worse. Flyers began showing up daily, not just in my mailbox but tucked under my porch railing, slipped between the slats of my fence, even wedged under my truck's windshield wipers. Each one more aggressive than the last. Then came the people. One afternoon, as I was loading hay onto the back of my truck, I caught a group of well-dressed strangers standing at the edge of my property. 4 or 5 of them, murmuring amongst themselves, pointing toward my barn, my fields, my house. At the center of them was Claudia, clipboard in hand, gesturing animatedly. I dropped the hay bale and walked toward them. They saw me coming, and like roaches scattering under light, most of them turned and hurried away. All except Claudia. "We're just observing," she said smoothly before I could even open my mouth. "Nothing to be alarmed about. Nothing to be alarmed about." That night, I installed more security cameras. Because whatever Claudia Stevenson and her HOA were planning, I had a feeling I'd need proof. I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful, familiar kind, the kind that tells you something's wrong. My first instinct was to check the animals, but the moment I stepped outside, I knew this wasn't about them. My well pump had stopped working. I crouched next to it, inspecting the pipes, expecting maybe a mechanical failure or a clog. But what I found was deliberate sabotage. Someone had poured cement into the main water line. My stomach clenched, a slow-burning rage rising in my chest. This wasn't bad luck. This was a message. I marched straight to my security monitor, rewinding the footage from the night before. There they were. Two figures in hoodies, their faces obscured, sneaking onto my property under the cover of darkness. One of them crouched by the well, working quickly while the other stood watch. They left the same way they came, slipping into the tree line before my cameras could catch a clear shot of their faces. But then I saw a flash of something familiar, Greg Thompson's SUV parked just off the road. I didn't have direct proof yet, but I had enough. I called the sheriff's office, filed a report, and then took a drive into town. It was time to start playing offense. Becca Sullivan's office was tucked between a coffee shop and a law firm that catered to estate planning for retirees. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and no-nonsense. The moment I explained my situation, she leaned back in her chair and let out a slow sigh. "This isn't just harassment," she said, folding her arms. "They're trying to wear you down. Make you feel isolated. Force you into compliance or get you to sell. They're wasting their time," I muttered. "Maybe," she said, tilting her head. "But you need to protect yourself. Keep every letter, every flyer, every report. And if they set foot on your land again? That's trespassing. We can press charges." I left Becca's office feeling more prepared but no less angry. By the time I got home, another HOA flyer was stuffed in my mailbox. This one was different. Bold, public accusations. It claimed that my farm was creating a safety hazard, attracting vermin, and lowering property values. It even listed recommendations for me to paint my barn, cut down trees, and limit my tractor use. The same day, I got a call from a local reporter. "I was hoping to get a comment on the complaints about your farm," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, like she already had the headline written. "I understand there have been concerns about the impact on the community." I nearly laughed. "And who told you that?" "I can't reveal my sources, of course," she said, fake apologetic. I didn't need her to. I already knew. Sure enough, the next morning, there it was. A full article in the local paper, claiming my farm was a growing problem, that neighbors were concerned for their property values, that I was refusing to cooperate with the reasonable efforts of the Green Haven Estates HOA. The HOA was no longer trying to convince me. They were turning the whole town against me. But if Claudia thought she could make me back down, she'd severely underestimated me. I upped my security. More cameras, better angles. I reached out to my own contacts, other farmers, local business owners, anyone who might push back against the HOA's narrative. Becca helped me start a legal file on their harassment tactics, documenting every single incident. Then, just as I thought things couldn't get worse, I woke up one morning to a new kind of attack. I stepped outside and immediately felt something was off. The animals were too quiet. Usually, my chickens were already making a racket, the goats shifting restlessly in their pens. But this morning, everything was eerily still. Then I saw them. 3 of my goats were collapsed in the dirt, their breathing ragged, their eyes dull. My stomach twisted as I rushed to them, checking for injuries, for signs of a predator. But it wasn't an attack. It was poison. I called the vet immediately, my pulse pounding in my ears. The diagnosis was clear: antifreeze poisoning. Someone had laced their feed with it. I checked the cameras. The footage showed 2 figures slipping through the fence line in the middle of the night. One of them carried a small bag, scattering something near the feeding area before leaving. The images weren't clear, but I knew exactly who was responsible. I called the sheriff again, this time with real evidence. Trespassing. Sabotage. And now? Animal cruelty. The problem was, I still couldn't prove Claudia's direct involvement. And that meant she'd get away with it. For now. But that was the moment I decided this wasn't just about defending my farm anymore. This was war. The morning after my poisoned goats nearly died, I expected some kind of reprieve, maybe even a moment of hesitation from Claudia and her pack of HOA enforcers. But I should have known better. If anything, they doubled down. 3 days later, I received a letter via certified mail. A lawsuit. The Green Haven Estates HOA was officially suing me for public nuisance, environmental hazards, and noise pollution. I sat at my kitchen table, gripping the paper so tightly my fingers ached. The language was deliberately vague, filled with dramatic accusations about my farm's negative impact on the community. According to the complaint, my tractor use, livestock, and unkempt land were all damaging the peaceful nature of Green Haven Estates. They even had the audacity to claim that my farm was causing an increase in allergy-related illnesses among HOA residents. It was absurd. Baseless. But that didn't matter. They weren't suing me to win. They were suing me to drain me. Court fees, legal expenses, time wasted. Claudia wanted to bury me in paperwork until I either caved or sold the farm. I called Becca immediately, reading the lawsuit to her over the phone. She let out a sharp exhale. They don't care if they have a case. This is lawfare, bogging you down with expensive, time-consuming litigation just to make your life miserable. Can we fight it? Absolutely. But it's going to be a long battle. I wasn't about to roll over. I had security footage of trespassing, evidence of their harassment, the poisoned animals, and now this sham lawsuit. We compiled everything into a counterclaim, arguing that this was nothing more than a targeted campaign of intimidation. But while we worked on that, Claudia took things even further. The next week, the sheriff showed up at my property again, this time with a county inspector. We received multiple complaints about safety violations, the inspector said, flipping through a clipboard. Noise levels, improper fencing, lack of waste management. I nearly laughed. Let me guess, complaints filed by the HOA? The inspector didn't answer, but the way he shifted uncomfortably told me everything. Still, I walked him through the property. Everything was in order. My fencing was secure, my livestock healthy, my equipment properly stored. By the end of the inspection, he looked exasperated. There's nothing here, he admitted, scribbling a note. But they've been persistent. I've had 5 different reports filed in the last 2 weeks. That number made my blood boil. 5 times, Claudia had tried to sic the county on me, hoping to find anything at all to use against me. And she wasn't finished. The next morning, I found a massive hole in my northern fence. It had been cut clean through, wide enough for my livestock to wander out. Tracks in the dirt suggested a vehicle had driven through. Someone had done this on purpose. I checked my security footage. More figures in the night. More shadows slipping through my land like cockroaches. They stayed out of range of the cameras, but I knew it was the HOA. This time, I called both the sheriff and my lawyer. This is escalation, Becca said. If we can get just one of them on record, one of them making a mistake, we can shut this whole thing down. So, I started digging. Claudia had been too bold. Too reckless. Somewhere, there had to be a paper trail, a slip-up. And then I found it. A county annexation request. Filed quietly, almost buried in legal jargon, but unmistakable. Claudia had formally petitioned the local government to absorb my farm into Greenhaven Estates, falsely claiming it was abandoned and in need of HOA oversight. She was trying to steal my land. I stared at the document, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a hostile takeover. I immediately forwarded it to Becca. "This is it," she said. "This is the final nail in her coffin. If she thinks she can force this through without a fight, she's about to learn the hard way." We filed an emergency complaint with the county, attaching every piece of evidence we had, the security footage, the sabotage, the harassment, the ridiculous lawsuit, and now this fraudulent annexation request. The county scheduled a hearing. And suddenly, Claudia wasn't so smug anymore. The hearing was packed. Word had spread fast, and it wasn't just me against Claudia anymore. Neighbors, local business owners, even some members of her own HOA board had shown up, curious to see how far she had overstepped. Claudia arrived looking every bit as confident as ever, her tailored suit crisp, her stack of documents clutched in perfectly manicured fingers. But for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes: uncertainty. Becca laid out our case with precision. She started with the documented harassment, the HOA flyers, the false complaints, the vandalism, the poisoned animals, backing each claim with security footage, sheriff's reports, and witness testimonies. She exposed the frivolous lawsuit, proving it was nothing more than a pressure tactic designed to drain me financially. Then came the knockout punch, the annexation request. Becca held it up for everyone to see, detailing how Claudia had lied to the county, claiming my farm was abandoned, attempting to force it under HOA control. The reaction in the room was instant: murmurs, whispers, a sharp intake of breath. Even some of Claudia's own board members looked blindsided. Claudia, of course, tried to fight back. She spun the same tired arguments about community harmony and property values, but they fell flat. She wasn't facing a few disgruntled neighbors now, she was answering to county officials, lawyers, and an audience that had grown sick of her power games. The ruling was swift. The annexation request was denied. The lawsuit was dismissed as baseless. The county issued a formal warning against Claudia and the HOA for filing fraudulent complaints and harassment. She had overplayed her hand, and now everyone saw her for what she was. But her downfall didn't end there. In the days following the hearing, Greenhaven Estates erupted in outrage. Homeowners, many of whom had once blindly supported Claudia, now turned on her. Stories of her intimidation tactics, her abuse of power, even her mismanagement of HOA funds surfaced. A special HOA meeting was called, and in a landslide vote, she was removed as president. Her reputation shattered, Claudia quietly put her house up for sale and left town a few months later. No grand speeches, no last attempts to exert control. Just an empty house and a name that became a cautionary tale. As for me, my farm was finally mine again. The flyers stopped. The fake complaints ended. Even the neighbors who had once sided with Claudia began stopping by, apologizing, offering to help with repairs. In a strange way, the very community she tried to weaponize against me became stronger in her absence. One crisp morning, I stood at the edge of my fields, watching the sun cast a golden glow over the land. It had been a long fight, but I had won, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been bullied into silence by people like Claudia. So I have to ask, have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen in power? Share your experience below. Let's see who had it worse.